to make the event tonight. There's the pop-up box right there. And so hopefully you'll be able to share this with friends and family afterwards if they weren't able to attend. If you have any questions tonight, unfortunately, given the time constraints on the event, we couldn't really build in a Q&A portion of this event, but definitely put any questions that you have in the chat, and we're going to try to answer those as the event is going. And for any questions that we aren't able to answer, we'll try and follow up with you after the event. And finally, thanks again for taking the time to be here. I know our lives are super busy. Everyone is here tonight in the evening, maybe around dinner time. We're so appreciative that you care so much about clean water that we've come together kind of as a community tonight. And so with that, we'll go to the next slide. And this is our phenomenal list of speakers tonight. And I'll introduce them really briefly, but then kind of turn it over to them to give just a short bio on themselves. I might actually skip Assemblymember Gottfried first, because we'll be coming back to him in just a second. And I've already introduced myself, of course, Director of Clean Water of Environmental Advocates, New York. And so I'll turn it now to Gabby Gonzalez, who is the Program Associate at Clean and Healthy New York, to introduce herself. So Gabby, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Gabby Gonzalez, and I am located in Brooklyn. At the moment, I'm from Oregon, and I am working with Clean and Healthy New York as a program associate.
Wonderful, thanks, Gabby. And next up is Liz Moran from Earth Justice.
Hi, everyone. Thanks to EA for organizing this and putting this all together and having me here. My name is Liz Moran, she, her pronouns. I am the New York policy advocate with Earth Justice. And some of you may know me from prior roles at NYPIRG, New York Public Interest Research Group, and also working with environmental advocates back in the day. So super excited to be here.
Great, thanks, Liz. And next up, we have Peggy Kurtz from the Rockland Water Coalition.
Thank you so much. So I am one of the leaders of the Rockland Water Coalition, which came together in 2008 to fight a desalination proposal, and we've been working together ever since for a sustainable water policy.
Thanks, Peggy. Next up is Joseph Campbell from Seneca Lake Guardian. Oh, Joe, you there? If you're speaking, we can't hear you.
How's that?
There we go.
Yeah, Joseph Campbell here, president of Seneca Lake Guardian. We're a Waterkeeper Alliance affiliate organization, and as Seneca Lake Guardian, and prior to that as Gas Free Seneca, we've been working to protect the Finger Lakes region from working to keep the Finger Lakes region's water, air, and way of life pristine and safe from threats like these forever chemicals.
Great, thanks so much, Joseph. And next up we have Ed Lawson, a member of the Stewart Air National Guard Base Restoration Advisory Committee from down in Newburgh.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Ed Lawson. I am the co-chair of the Stewart Air National Guard Restoration Advisory Committee, soon to be Restoration Advisory Board. And I also am a part of the Sustainable Hudson Valley's board as we approach and deal with climate control, specifically the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that's been released, I think, in 2019. And finally, I lead an organization called Family and Community Engagement Services for the last 5 years, doing just that work, engaging families and communities in the work of being advocates for themselves and having a voice to speak truth to power. So I'm excited to be here to talk about what's going on in Newburgh around this environmental issue called PFAS.
Great, thanks so much, Ed. And last but certainly not least, my partner in crime at Environmental Advocates, Dharma Santos Santiago, our Clean Water Associate.
Yeah, hey y'all, good evening. My name's Dharma, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Clean Water Associate at EANY, and thank you everyone for coming out. I really appreciate it. And I might be sipping my smoothie, so please ignore that. But yeah, it's dinner time, so I'm pretty hungry. And I'll turn it back to you, Rob.
Great, fantastic. And we can go to the next slide then, Amanda. Wonderful. So I skipped over Assemblymember Richard Gottfried at the beginning of that speaker introduction because I knew that this slide was coming up next. We are so pleased to be joined here tonight by a leader on clean water in the New York State Assembly. He is the chair of the Assembly Health Committee. He was first elected to the State Assembly in 1970. He has been in the state legislature for over 50 years, the Assembly Health Chair since 1987. He represents an assembly district in Manhattan and is one of the sponsors of a bill that just passed the legislature to expand testing for PFAS in drinking water. Assemblymember Richard Gottfried, so grateful you could be with us here tonight and happy to turn it over to you for some opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much. And it is terrific to be with you. And before I do anything else, I want to thank all of the groups that are involved in this program tonight for the work that you do, and in particular, the work that you've done to help get this bill put together and passed. And hopefully you'll be working to lobby the governor to sign it into law. In 2017, we enacted legislation to have the health department create a list of emerging contaminants that water supply systems would be required to test for. We're now 4 years later, and there are, I think, about 2 chemicals on that list. It was like pulling teeth to get them to add those 2 chemicals a little while ago. But all of the PFAS chemicals and a variety of other chemicals that are on EPA lists and have been for a long time are still not on that list. The Water Quality Council that's supposed to be working with the health commissioner to put that list together, would convene meetings or would schedule meetings, and then they'd get canceled, and then they'd schedule them again, they'd get canceled again, and no action has been taken. And that's why we put together this bill, Assembly Bill 126A, that you'll be hearing more about, to put together a list of, I guess it's a couple of dozen chemicals that are all on EPA lists, and to just declare these are on the list, period. And the health department can make more, can add to that list, but this is the first start of the list. We're sick and tired of waiting on the health department. Now, interestingly, while this bill is awaiting action by the governor, on October 5th, the Water Quality Council has scheduled yet another meeting to brief its members on this, that, and the other thing. Well down on that agenda is an item called Path Forward for Additional EC, meaning emergency contaminant listings. Path Forward for additional EC listings. So at this coming meeting, they're not proposing to add chemicals to the list. They're proposing to discuss the path forward for adding chemicals to the list. Now, I guess a path forward is better than a path backwards, better than no path at all, but it's certainly not the kind of action that should have been taken years ago now. And so we are continuing to press forward with this bill. I'm very happy that it will be on the desk of a new governor, Kathy Hochul, not the governor who presided over the Hoosick Falls disaster and has presided over inaction on this topic for the last 4 or 5 or so years, but rather it'll be on the desk of the new governor, Kathy Hochul. And we will shortly be having a new health commissioner, not the health commissioner who presided over the disaster of Hoosick Falls, but a new commissioner, Mary Bassett, who for several years was our New York City health commissioner, and who I'm just delighted to have coming on board as our state health commissioner. So that's the story. You'll hear a lot more about PFAS tonight, and hopefully you will all get involved in lobbying the governor to sign the bill. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Assembly Member. All right, and I think then without further ado, we'll shift to our next agenda item. And I believe Gabby Gonzalez is up now to talk about PFAS 101.
All right, so what are PFAS? PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, are chemicals used in industry for their waterproof and flame retardant properties. They're commonly known as forever chemicals because they persist in the environment and accumulate in the human body. There are over 9,000 PFAS chemicals, and they are highly mobile in water and travel a long distance. And some of the health effects that are linked to PFAS are kidney and testicular cancer, impaired liver function, impaired fertility, impaired fetal development, chronic intestinal inflammation, disruption of critical thyroid hormones, weakened immune system, high cholesterol, preeclampsia, potentially fatal complication of pregnancy. Those are just a few. And some of the most common exposures are in this diagram. So it can get into the water through PFAS containing products that are in the landfill and they get into the water. Upstream sources, it can be from firefighting foam, from military bases, airports, or other sources. And then that washes away and goes into our water streams. Manufacturing emissions that contain PFAS, wastewater containing PFAS, and land applications of biosoils containing PFAS that will run off into the water. And then I will turn it to Liz.
Great, thanks so much, Gabby. So New York State unfortunately has a track record with PFAS now, and we're not the only state. PFAS are gaining a lot of national attention and global attention because, as Gabby was explaining, they are highly persistent chemicals once they get into the environment. So New York's PFAS history starts with the Hoosick Falls drinking water contamination crisis that came to light in 2015. Some context that's really important here is in Hoosick Falls, the PFOA pollution in their drinking water was not uncovered due to any state testing. It was not uncovered due to any federal testing. It was actually uncovered because of the initiative of a single resident, Michael Hickey. In 2014, Michael Hickey took the initiative to test the water in his community for PFOA. He decided to test for this particular chemical because he knew it was used at the company in the community, St. Cobain Performance Plastics. His father had worked at that company, and his father passed away earlier from kidney cancer. And Michael was noticing that there were a lot of people in the community getting sick, and he felt that something was wrong and there might be a reason for this. So he tested the water for PFOA and found very high levels. He didn't know what to do. He reported it to all the right people. He reported to his local government. It was reported to the county health department, and then the Department of Health, the State Department of Health, found out. But unfortunately, he was told, and the community was told, that the water was fine. In fact, they weren't even told anything. The Department of Health sat on that information for a year and a half. What ended up happening was EPA got informed about the PFOA pollution, and it took EPA stepping in to inform residents that their drinking water was unsafe to drink. So residents were extremely alarmed. This, for many of them, was the first time that they were hearing about the chemical PFOA. It's deeply alarming when you find out that there's a chemical in your water that you can't see, taste, or smell, and has likely been harming the health of you and your family and your pets for potentially many years. So residents started demanding answers. They wanted to understand what happened in their community. What is PFOA? How did it get in their water? Why did it get in their water? Why didn't the government respond quickly and tell them what was going on? And what needs to happen to make sure that what happened to them does not happen again and doesn't happen anywhere else in New York State? So as a result of their advocacy, in the fall of 2016, the state finally held drinking water quality hearings, which were very important and covered a number of issues. And ultimately, what they came up with was a package of legislation. And one piece of that puzzle was the Emerging Contaminants Monitoring Act. This legislation sought to close the loophole. So I mentioned earlier that in Hoosick Falls, Michael Hickey, an individual resident, decided to test his water. But that shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be upon individuals suspecting there's something in their water that prompts testing to happen. It should be facilitated by our government. So what this legislation does is it directs the Department of Health to come up with a list of unregulated contaminants that are also likely to be present in drinking water and have harmful health impacts to be tested in every water system in New York State, regardless of the size of that community served. And that's the other element here. Hoosick Falls is a very small community of about 3,300 residents. And as a result, they didn't benefit from similar testing that is required federally for larger communities like Newburgh, which you guys will hear about later. So that legislation passed, but now fast forward a few years, they utilized that moment to regulate PFOA and PFOS by creating drinking water standards known as maximum contaminant levels. So they established a maximum contaminant level of 10 parts per trillion for PFOA and 10 parts per trillion for PFOS. So this is very important, but now we're talking about 6 years since they knew about the Hoosick Falls drinking water crisis, and they finally came up with drinking water standards for just 2 of what's many different PFAS chemicals. And at this point, they have not implemented the Emerging Contaminant Monitoring Act. So next slide. So we're now at about 4 years after the Emerging Contaminant Monitoring Act was passed, and the Department of Health has yet to implement this. They will argue that they have implemented it because they created the drinking water standards for PFOA, PFOS, and another emerging contaminant, 1,4-dioxane, which has been a huge issue of concern on Long Island in particular. But this has been very frustrating. Residents in Hoosick Falls and other communities have wanted to benefit from expanded testing. They want to know what's in their water. This is fundamental to make sure that we protect people's health and act quickly in response to contamination. So this past year, legislation was passed to supplement the Emerging Contaminant Monitoring Act, which creates the first list on behalf of the Department of Health and directs them to implement this list, to create it after 90 days. The list includes a number of chemicals, which we'll be going over further, but one of the important pieces here is it includes a larger list of PFAS chemicals for testing. So should this legislation be signed, it'll close the testing gap for over 2.5 million New Yorkers who have never benefited from testing like this. It would provide data so we can advocate for a class-based standard for chemicals like PFOA and potentially regulate other contaminants as well. And this, very importantly, would be the most comprehensive testing program in the entire country for unregulated drinking water contaminants. So it's very important this is signed into law. With that, I'm going to be turning it over to Dharma so you can all learn about how we can get this signed into law.
Thanks, Liz. I appreciate it. And actually, we're going to move this part to the end. So I'm going to turn it over again to our community perspective. So we'll do this at the end so people have enough time to kind of walk through it. We will turn it over to Peggy from Rockland Water Coalition.
Okay, just give me one minute. Okay. Okay. I live in Rockland County in the lower Hudson Valley. In November of 2020, 90% of Rockland residents received notices from our water utility informing us that PFOA and PFOS chemicals were detected in our drinking water. Those same notices assured us that the water was safe to drink, even though the chemicals, we were told, exceeded state drinking water standards. And most of us were quite baffled by what that meant. I'm one of the longtime leaders of a grassroots group called the Rockland Water Coalition. We began reaching out to environmental professionals to learn more, and we got quite an education. We learned that we are a typical example of hundreds of communities across the country with similar contamination. Only a few miles from us across the river in Westchester and Putnam counties, 2 schools had to close off their drinking water entirely due to very high levels of PFAS in their groundwater. I know you're going to hear from Newburgh, which is just up the river from Rockland. The PFAS chemicals in Rockland's drinking water are at low levels relative to some other communities, but nonetheless, nearly every one of the groundwater wells that supply our county is contaminated. The phrase we heard over and over again from the beginning, from one environmental professional after another, was there are no known safe levels of PFAS in drinking water. In short, these chemicals are highly toxic and they are ubiquitous. And they're not just in our drinking water, they're also in consumer products. We also learned of the extent to which chemical companies, specifically 3M and DuPont, are really complicit, that both of these companies were warned from the very beginning and by their own scientists just how toxic these chemicals are. And they continue to proliferate them and put more and more chemicals out on the market. We also came to understand that PFOA and PFOS are just the tip of the iceberg. There are 9,000 to 10,000 PFAS chemicals, many of the others every bit as toxic as the 2 that are regulated in New York State. As the Rockland Water Coalition, we had run public campaigns in the past, so we were known by the public and by elected officials, and we had credibility. With the help of environmental advocates, New York, and other professionals, we hosted a series of virtual forums with experts, and literally hundreds of people came out for each of them, hungry for information. We circulated a petition which gathered over 1,000 signatures, and a sign-on letter asking for information and specific actions by the utility, Department of Health, and DEC. And the sign-on letter was signed by 84 organizations, including Planned Parenthood, AARP, NAACP, religious groups, the local Chamber of Commerce, local businesses, and more. We connected with our local and state legislators, our congressmen and senators. We held press conferences and participated in a press conference with Senator Schumer. Despite all of this, we still do not have answers to many of the questions we've been asking from the beginning. What other PFAS chemicals might be in our water? Will all of the PFAS chemicals be cleaned up? What are the sources of the contamination? Will the PFAS be disposed of safely? But at this point, ensuring safe cleanup for Rockland is no longer enough for us. The real answers are to get to the root of the problem with action at the state and eventually at the federal level. We need strong enforceable standards for the entire class of PFAS chemicals. Recently, we've also learned that the production and the incineration of PFAS chemicals produces very powerful greenhouse gases. There may be serious impacts on human fertility. This is a veritable plague on all of us, and it's one that is simply unnecessary. Like lead, PFAS is toxic at even the lowest detectable levels, and also like lead, it is ubiquitous. It is all over. It wasn't until lead was strictly regulated that blood levels of lead began to drop precipitously. We can do the same with PFAS. and we must. As with lead, we need a statewide ban on non-essential uses of PFAS. But right now, we are very focused on the Emerging Contaminants Monitoring Act, which is truly the next big step. The truth is that we still do not know the full extent of the contamination of our drinking water in Rockland or in the rest of the state, because the utilities focus on testing only for the two chemicals that New York State regulates, which still leaves out all of the other 9,000 to 10,000 toxic PFAS chemicals. If this bill is passed, it would give us a much better extent of the problem, and it would be the necessary first step for strict regulation of this entire class of toxic chemicals. So I urge all of you to let the new governor, to let Governor Hochul know that we are holding her responsible for ensuring that the Emerging Contaminants Monitoring Act is signed into law as soon as possible. It is simply unacceptable to let more New Yorkers continue to be exposed to these chemicals. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. And now I will turn it over to Joe.
Yes, I already introduced myself earlier. Joseph Campbell, president of Seneca Lake Guardian. I want to give a big shout out to environmental advocates for taking the lead on this legislation, and that's pending before sitting on Governor Hochul's desk now. And for this opportunity to give tell a cautionary tale regarding a problem that we're having right here in the Finger Lakes. Seneca Army Depot is a 10,000 plus acre munitions storage and disposal facility situated between Seneca and Cayuga Lakes, the largest two Finger Lakes. The U.S. Army operated this base beginning in 1941 and subsequently abandoned and turned the majority of the land over to the Seneca County IDA in September of 2000. They retained ownership of several parcels that were listed as Superfund sites by the EPA when high levels of PFAS chemicals were discovered. The most likely cause of the contamination was the use of firefighting foam in training exercises. By the way, there's still a fire academy on the ground now, and I hope that they've stopped using firefighting foam in their training exercises. But in March of 2018, Department of Health tested samples of private water wells adjacent to the Seneca Army Depot and found combined PFOA and PFOS levels at over 41.5 parts per trillion at one private well on the west side of the lake, and elevated levels at several other private water wells that were below the EPA's threshold at the time. The Department of Health recommendation, additional testing. Okay. And since then, New York State has implemented much more stringent MCLs for PFAS at 10 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS respectively. In a letter to the Department of Health in March 2019, Seneca Lake Guardian pointed out the astoundingly high levels of PFAS that the Department of Health had discovered at the depot at over 89,000 parts per trillion at one site as early as 2017. The elevated levels in private water wells both to the east and west of the depot boundary. And in that letter, we requested the Department of Health to investigate, map the plume and its potential to travel off the depot property and towards Seneca Lake, a drinking water resource for roughly 100,000 people. We also expressed our concern that parts of the depot were being subdivided for agricultural use. Most of the wells out there, there's no real good municipal water supply. We're out in the middle of nowhere here. The response from the Department of Health dated April 19th, 2019, indicated that they were taking the problem seriously, and I'll quote from that letter, quote, "The long-term management of the former Seneca Army Depot site is being addressed through a federal facility agreement between the Army, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and the state of New York. As part of this agreement, the New York State Department of Health has recommended to the DEC that additional actions be completed at the former Seneca Army Depot site to further define the nature and extent of PFAS contamination and to further assess the potential human exposures to PFAS in area private drinking water wells, and discussions between the agencies and the Army are ongoing. We will continue collaborating and requesting the actions are taken expeditiously. End quote. Now here we are, 2.5 years later, and to date we have had no further indication that anything has been done, leaving area residents in the dark as to the extent of the PFAS contamination, not only at the former depot site, but in private drinking water wells surrounding the depot. Seneca Lake Guardian has high hopes that Governor Kathy Hochul will sign S1739A and A126A into law, and with the appointment of Dr. Mary T. Bassett as the new health commissioner, New York State residents will finally know whether their drinking water is safe for themselves and for their children. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe, for sharing your story. And now we will pass it on to Ed to share the perspective in Newburgh.
Thank you for the opportunity to share. So as Newburgh goes, we actually have been able to make some real progress. I think we are the first Air National Guard base to be approved for remediation. So we're excited about that, but I wanted to just give you some background and talk about where we've come from. So in about 2014 or 15, we became aware of the issue of PFAS at the Stewart Air National Guard base, and that our system of water, we had a very vaunted, robust, and viable water system that was developed in the late 19th century that predates by almost 50 years the vaunted New York City water supply system. It was completely incapacitated by PFAS, PFOA contamination emanating from the Stewart Air National Guard base. It came through the stormwater management system at Stewart National Guard base. We were in the watershed. The stormwater would be overflowing, and after years of, and I should say this, even though it was detected back in 2014, the contamination had been believed to have been ongoing since they had used the AFFF firefighting foam for years at the Stewart National Guard base, and that it seeped into the soil, into the ground, and over years of the stormwater washing down into the watershed, it contaminated our water supply, such that we had to be diverted to the New York City water supply system. While it's great, it does still impact the way we engage. So that happened in 2014-15. In about 2016, we had some biometric testing. Over about 3,500 citizens from the Newburgh area were tested. And the purpose of the testing was to identify if PFAS had gotten into the blood system of people living in the community. I want to just categorize that as there was not a lot of information being shared. They did have public meetings. Those public meetings were not in the traditional sense of meeting people where they are. If there was a public meeting, it was either at the activity center where the city council held meetings, at the Unity Center, which is in Newburgh, a former converted armory, or at SUNY Orange. They did not go to community centers. They did not go to churches. They did not go to places where, or housing projects and community centers to speak to folk where they are. It's important for me to mention that because in 2020, the CDC's Agency for Toxic Substance and Disease Registry also did some testing. Because it was in the midst of in the midst of COVID, they were only able to test about maybe 75 people. But again, when they came to talk about those testings and when they came to access folk in the community, they went to those vaunted places. And so you may have known that Albany has received funding as a part of maybe 8 sites across the country to study PFAS even further. And I'm a part of the community advisory panel representing Newburgh, along with Councilman Anthony Grice and several other members of my RAC committee. And we have been talking to Dr. Erin Bell, who is the co-principal investigator for the multi-site study. I say multi-site because Newburgh is going to be tested, and they're going to be testing about 700 people, 500 men and women, and 200 children. And Hoosick Falls is a part of our study. I think they're going to be testing about 300 people there. That's a grant, and it's not subject to what was being shared earlier by Elizabeth. Though, you know, that legislation still needs to move forward. But this is a part of a grant, and I wanted to share a couple of things about and shout out Dr. Erin Bell and her team and her staff and her willingness to really engage and then involve the community in the process. So we were able to convene a bunch of stakeholders at a local Black coffee shop in the heart of the city of Newburgh, where Dr. Bell was able to, we had about 15 people. We had members of the school board. We had members of faith-based institutions. We had the NAACP there. We had members of the environmental justice community. By the way, Newburgh is an environmental justice zone based on a 10-year longitudinal study that indicates that identified environmental justice zones across the New York State, which I would encourage everyone to try to find this study to find out if they qualify or if they're in an environmental justice zone. Because this issue is not just about PFAS, it's about health, wellness, and environmental justice. And I want to make the point to say that the grant that Albany received was for PFAS, but as a part of her wanting to be involved and engaged in the community, they not only are testing for PFAS, they're also testing for lead and the impact of lead in the blood. So here's an opportunity for the community. We took advantage of the opportunity and for the community to leverage this research to go beyond and above to speak to health and wellness as opposed to just this PFAS issue, which we're excited about. And Dr. Bell is really engaged in going to those places and spaces where the other by testing and entities and agencies, when they came to Newburgh, never went to. So we're excited about the opportunity. And I think I mentioned earlier too, that we were moving from a RAC to a RAB. What that means essentially is that we had our relative risk site evaluation approved by the Department of Defense. For those of you that don't know, that's the process it's used to evaluate the severity of your site. In other words, the worst sites get funded first. And so Newburgh was, because of all of our efforts with the community that I just finished and the stakeholders in the community that I just finished talking to you about, we're able to make the case that we should get funded as an Air National Guard base. The funding didn't actually include Air National Guard bases, but we would be able to advocate, thanks to Senator Schumer and others, to make sure that we were in a place to get that done for us. And we were approved, I think, in May, and we have started the process of remedial investigation, which that's a part of the CERCLA process that takes years, I'm told, but at least we're in the space of moving forward. The highlight of this is when you move from a RAC to a RAB, there's funding available. Because one of the challenges that we had is being able to communicate so that the public can be engaged in a remediation process. There was a lot of acronyms thrown at us. I want to congratulate the speaker that spoke, and she was able to say what PFAS actually is. I still can't do it. Polyformulated something other. But so she did a really good job. So I want to congratulate her. But the point is, we wanted to be able to communicate to the public. How could you advocate for yourselves when you can't even understand some of the lingo, the technical lingo that is going down? So we're excited now that we're a RAB, that we can get funding for technical assistance to do things like translation, to do things like demystifying language, to create infographics, to create videos even, to host health fairs and other avenues to get information to the public so they can be empowered to help themselves. I'm going to stop there. I can go on, but I'm excited about where we are. but the work doesn't stop here. We have to keep pressing forward with legislation like we're talking about tonight, but also with identifying funding outside of the traditional funding that speaks to health, wellness, and environmental justice. So again, I would encourage you all to gather with your environmental justice stakeholders and colleagues. I would also reference the Community Leadership and Community Protection Act. In that, they have certain criteria around environmental issues that we should also be looking at to tie in, because they create certain goals. And part of those goals include equity, education, and economic development. And 35% of that money has to engage these communities that are, they haven't even come up with the definition, but disadvantaged communities. So I'm encouraged to continue the conversation. If we can be of any help and collaborate, please reach out and have a great night with the rest of the evening and the festivities.
Beautiful. Thank you, Ed, for sharing. I really appreciate going in depth into where y'all started and where y'all are now and where you envision moving forward. So that's really exciting. Thank you so much. And if we move to the next slide, we can talk about, oh, I think I need to be pinned. I don't know, but I don't see myself yet, but cool. Now I see myself. So thanks. Thanks, Amanda. So kind of highlighting a couple takeaways from the speakers that just spoke throughout the evening. PFAS is everywhere. So we touched on earlier that industry and companies created PFAS chemicals because they are so good at repelling water and acting as like non-stick agents and other things of that nature. And so they're used across industries worldwide, globally, and can be found in pretty much anything. Maybe anything is a bit too broad, but in waterproof clothing, in nonstick cookware. Rob mentioned in the chat, carpeting is a huge concern. PFAS is everywhere, and those products make their ways into our landfills, and those landfills leach into our drinking water. And as Gabby mentioned earlier, drinking water is the primary source of exposure for PFAS because it's used in all these other aspects of industry, even in our pesticides and our firefighting foam, and they all make their way eventually to our drinking water sources and travel extremely long distances and are extremely persistent because that's exactly what they were built to do, to be extremely persistent in the face of the elements of fire, of water, things of that nature. And so we must do what we can to minimize our exposure and to clean up PFAS when found. And New York has begun addressing these PFAS issues, and advocates and activists and communities across the state, but there's a long way to go. We see that in 2017, the Emerging Contaminants Monitoring Act was passed, but the intent of the law has not been seen through. And so we're here advocating 4 years later to make sure the intent of that law is seen through. And we still have ways to go in a number of other angles addressing this issue. And testing is the vital first step in addressing this contamination in our drinking water. And when we monitor and treat water and even remove PFAS when necessary, it must be rooted in accountability and transparency and community. We've seen and heard from speakers tonight that when this PFAS contamination is found and when it's communicated to the public, the investment isn't always there. The kind of genuine nature of what it takes to clean up this water, communicate to people what's in their water, and to have people invest and feel safe drinking their own water is really important. And that accountability, transparency, and community are the principles of doing that work. And we have to hold ourselves accountable to those principles, our agencies, our activists, the larger community, and our friends and family, and getting folks plugged in and educated about this issue as well. And activating people is critical for this work, critical for building a base of people to advocate and achieving clean water for all. And like Ed mentioned, PFAS pollution is not the only thing impacting our water, and it's not the only environmental threat that we face. It's intertwined and weaved together with lead pipes and lead entering drinking water, making sure that water is affordable as we treat this water, as we monitor these systems, that our water rates maintain like affordable and accessible. So everything is connected when doing this work. And it's really important to lean into that and understand what that means and take the time to educate one another and to communicate what this work means and how we can get it done. And with that, I will turn it over to Rob to talk about some ways that everyone can stay involved, and then we'll follow up with our action moment calling the governor's office.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Dharma. And maybe I'll just wait for a sec for myself to get pinned to the board, because I don't think I can quite see me yet. There we go. You can all see my shining face again. So we're close to the end of our program, and I know there was a lot of information discussed tonight. Hopefully it really energized you, kind of informed you about the scale and the extent of the problem out there, how much there is to do, and how important it is for us to get involved to be protecting drinking water. And so I hope that you're energized to stay involved in this issue. And there are a number of ways that you can do that. The first is to do exactly what you're doing tonight, to become educated on the issue, to read fact sheets and attend forums, and to share that information with your friends and family so that we grow that knowledge of PFAS, we grow that knowledge of the threats to our drinking water across the state. The second thing that you can do is support legislation. And many of the organizations that we're talking tonight are active on both the local and the state, even the federal level. There is some phenomenal legislation out there to expand testing for PFAS in drinking water, to ban PFAS in our products, to make sure that there is proper health monitoring for these chemicals. So much that is out there that our representatives can enact to make sure that we feel safe when we turn on the tap. And of course, one of those pieces of legislation we'll be returning to in just a second, and it is the bill that Assemblymember Godfrey is carrying. So that's the second thing, support legislation, because it has to be a policy solution to these problems. As with so many environmental issues, individual action can't solve the PFAS crisis. We can't just be installing individual filters in people's homes. We need to be cleaning up everybody's drinking water at the same time and at the source. The third thing that you can do is to get plugged into local clean water efforts. There are some amazing organizations across the state that are organizing on PFAS, that are advocating on PFAS. You heard from a lot of them tonight, from Peggy in Rockland to Ed in Newburgh to Joseph in the Finger Lakes. If you live in any of those communities, definitely get in touch with those folks. And if you don't know their contact information, reach out to us. We can get that to you. But also look around to your community, see who might be out there that's advocating for clean water environmental issues, and get involved with them. And if you don't see that type of organization in your community, consider starting one. Consider getting your friends and neighbors together and saying, let's find out what we need to advocate for and win some policy change at your local level, at the state level, even at the federal level. And if you want help with that, definitely reach out to us too, because we do that a lot in our jobs. So get plugged into local efforts, another great next step. The fourth thing that you can do, try to find out, at least from the limited information we have right now, what is in your drinking water. Your water utility might be testing for some PFAS, they might not, but call them up, find out. They are supposed to publish every single year this thing called an annual water quality report. It is this document that's supposed to lay out all the water tests that they've run. It's supposed to give you all the results of what's in your water. Call them up, see if you can get that document, see what they can tell you about the testing that they've done for PFAS. Your water utility works for you. Many of these are publicly owned, operated by your local government. You have every right to call them up and say, I want to know what's in my water. And then that's information that you can then take and use in your organizing efforts. And so finally, our last action item then, which actually, again, we'll get to in just a bit, all of these kind of tactics that we can take to push legislation forward, to push policy forward. Calling legislators is perhaps the most important and powerful thing that we can do to get them to pay attention to an issue. Sending them emails is also great, as well as other collective actions like press conferences and rallies. So as you're getting organized in your community, utilize those kind of tactics because they really do make a difference. Decision makers pay attention when communities get organized and they start advocating on issues. And so with that, hopefully now you're really jazzed up to take action. And I know Dharma is just about to kind of lead us through something that we can do right now to support the bill that Assemblymember Godfrey has and to urge the governor to sign it as soon as possible.
Cute. Okay, thanks, Rob. So before people hop off, this will only take 5 minutes of your time. It's so quick and easy. And I just want to walk through it with folks real quick. And would love for people to communicate once they've called the governor's office to drop it in the chat before they hop off. So I will walk through kind of the steps to calling the governor's office, why we're calling the governor's office, and do all that fun stuff. So like Rob said, calling the governor's office or emailing the governor's office, I've said that a million times, is one of the easiest and most accessible and powerful asks we can do to demonstrate our support for a bill. And we want to let Governor Hochul know that drinking water testing is a priority for New Yorkers everywhere. And Amanda will drop that link in the chat, or maybe Rob or someone else, to the action page to make this phone call. But this teach-in is part of a broader day of action today. So this morning we held a press conference with many powerful local leaders and state leaders to push Governor Hochul to sign this bill into law. And now we are engaging everyone to call into the governor's office. So hopefully she's getting a lot of Twitter blasts, news blasts, phone blasts, telling her to sign this bill. So the first step is to enter the link and the instructions into your browser. And so Amanda put it in the chat. You can just copy and paste that into your browser. Fill out the information to receive the phone script and calling service. And I'm going to walk through what the platform looks like right now in a second. And then call the office and leave a brief message. It's literally one sentence. It's so quick and easy. And then post clean water for all in the chat when completed before hopping off. So if we move on to the next slide, we can show y'all what the action page looks like, which our lovely campaigns associate Amanda put together. So thank you, Amanda. But this is what it looks like when you open the action page. And it gives a little bit of details about this testing bill. And then to the right has those little like sections to put in some information to generate the governor's information. So if we move on to the next slide, I provide an example of filling it out. So that's like my name. That's not my address. So if y'all want to come like to my house, you'll go to the EA office, but address, email, all that fun stuff. And then if you click the red button, call officials, it will go onto the next page, which if we move to the next slide, will give you some more detailed steps on what to do. So there, right in front of you is a very short script on what to say when calling the office, and no one will pick up. It will be a service where you just like leave a voice message. And when you hit that red button, call officials, you'll get a call from an Albany-based number. and it'll actually be Amanda, and she'll walk through the talking points and the script, and then connect you to the governor's office, and then you can leave your voicemail and hang up. And the script is very straightforward. It's as simple as, hi, my name is Dharma. I live in Albany, New York, and I urge you to sign A126A S1759A into law. This bill will expand testing for toxic chemicals in drinking water. I deserve to know what's in my water, and so does every New Yorker. Please sign this bill immediately to protect public health. Thank you. And that's it. It's just as easy as that. And then that little action page with like the confetti will pop up, and then you'll be good to go. And you can share on Facebook or on Twitter, which we strongly urge you to do so. It has like a pre-written tweet. You could just post it, and then you're done. And you've let all your friends and family know to take action as well. And so while we take a couple minutes to make these calls, I highly encourage folks to stay on, even turn on your screens if you'd like, and to put Clean Water for All in the chat when you're done. So I'm going to go on mute. Amanda's going to play some funky music, and I'm going to keep my video on, call the governor's office, and post in the chat when I'm done. And I hope you all do the same. And once y'all are done, y'all are free to hop off. But yeah, hoping y'all can stay on, make this quick call, and then hop off. I'm seeing that folks might be having some issues with the calling service. There might be too many people calling at once. So if that's the case, and if it doesn't work, definitely give it a try later or tomorrow. We'll follow up with the email to leave a message. And with that, if no one has any other questions, then we can hop off. But thank you everyone for joining today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, EA, for organizing.
Thank you for organizing.
Thanks.
Hey, Peggy.